A comparative literature department would ideally be a place where translated text could be read with heightened awareness of the nature of translation, and where the practice of translation itself could be taught. However, comparative literature itself has been the object of many of the same forms of suspicion as translation, and its place in the university is quite perilous, as attested by Gayatri Spivak's recent book about conflict titled Death of a Discipline. Translation seems to be doing a better job of finding a home in MFA and creative writing programs, which are comfortable with the idea that translation is an art form. Translation workshops that engage students in practice are probably more likely to be taught in that context than in any other. However, those programs are not at all equipped to furnish students with the linguistic and cultural knowledge they'll need in order to become translators in the first place. They can only hope that a few people will turn out who, for whatever reason, already have those in place. Can a creative writing program produce a Robert Fagles or an Edith Grossman? Meanwhile, the modern language departments have the multiple language skills and literary erudition necessary for a more informed appreciation of translation, but have tended to take the Hebraic view and regard it with enormous suspicion. As we all know, a translator's skilled use of the target language is generally even more crucial to a successful translation than his or her level of fluency in the source language. This fact makes many in the modern language departments feel that translation into English does not come under their purview, and may even represent a kind of threat to their fundamental mission. On several recent occasions, I've heard senior faculty in modern language programs at leading university publicly voice the opinion that the only proper kind of translation would be one that is deliberately inadequate, a rendering of the source text so complex and oblique that it would force the reader back to learn the source language. A famous model, of course, would be Vladimir Nabokov's translation of Eugene Onegin. This notion might well be the origin of the dreaded academic translation that I mentioned earlier. It finds its fullest expression in Walter Benjamin's The Task of the Translator, which famously concludes in one of its English translations that the interlinear version of the scriptures is the archetype or ideal of all translation. And as a pedagogical device within the classroom to help, say, a beginning Korean student gain a fuller understanding of a work of Korean literature while simultaneously learning the language in which it is written, the interlinear version can be very useful. Translation has been largely discarded as a tool of foreign language acquisition, and perhaps it shouldn't have been. The interlinear version is not, however, a way to carry out the main goal of a literary translator's mission, to bring literary works to life in new contexts, to enrich our own and other literary cultures by introducing them to each other. Benjamin, of course, proposed interlinear translation as an ideal in a preface to his own translation of Baudelaire's Tableau Parisien, which is not interlinear or deliberately inadequate at all. Of course not. Would a Shakespeare scholar insist that no audience should see one of the plays without going through its entire textual history, the complex sequence of decisions that lead one edition of Hamlet to render the famous line as, "Oh, that this too sallied flesh would melt," while another makes it, "Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt," and another, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt"? Would such a scholar claim that no performance should take place unless those editorial decisions were spelled out and made transparent, so that the audience itself could be in the position of Shakespeare's editors and understand the degree to which the plays have been constructed by those editors? We can imagine a production that strove to do that, and if carried off well, it might have great appeal, much like the Worcester Group performance of Chekhov's Three Sisters I saw some years ago, which featured the play's translator, the late, great Paul Schmidt, in the role of the doctor. Periodically, the rest of the cast would freeze, and Schmidt would step out of character to discourse on the problems involved in translating a given word. It was fantastic. Nevertheless, it's hard to imagine a scholar of the theater arguing that such extreme textual self-consciousness should be de rigueur for any proper production of a play. Why then does Benjamin's ideal continue to be proposed in a way that questions and diminishes the work of those who, like Benjamin, offer translations that are presented as fully recontextualized works of literature? It is a given of criticism, commentary, scholarship, that texts are infinitely replaceable by the commentaries that are written about them. Many of us take in far more movie reviews than we do movies. Readers, students, even academics may be more likely to read a biography of Victor Hugo than a work by Victor Hugo, Harold Bloom's latest analysis of Shakespeare than a Shakespeare play. Why is the potential replacement affected by a translation so much more suspicious than that affected by any other form of commentary? Why, in other words, and here we return to the central question, do we not see translation as a form of commentary? Like criticism, translation involves research, erudition, responsibility. Like criticism, it offers a reading of a text that is open-ended, subject to debate, never definitive, but we resist. For the third component of my explanation, I take my inspiration from Roland Barthes' Mythologie, a sequence of essays originally written between 1954 and 1956, in which Barthes translated the ideological meaning of various apparently trivial facets of French popular culture, such as professional wrestling, the coverage of celebrity weddings in popular magazines, and the bangs decorating the foreheads of the ancient Romans in a Hollywood movie starring Marlon Brando. Mythologie warns us to reserve our deepest suspicions for anything that presents itself as simply natural, as a thing that has simply come about of its own accord, ce qui va de soi, rather than being produced by a set of historical factors.